Hello, friends. My name is Alchemy. Happy holidays. Hope everyone is doing good and staying safe and spending time with friends, family, and loved ones. Today, I'm going to be talking about a relatively special video because this has been one of the key focal points of my musical journey that helped me figure out how to make this kind of music that I love to make, which is halftime. There is a very large difference behind the main thing I think people get confused with, which is what I'm talking about, which is pockets and rhythm that people might categorize as swing. I even think that it's something different than what you might see on things even like Bitwig that might be like humanize. The main academic term that I want to be discussing with you all is the idea of rubato. And that would be the academic term. The actual application of it is something I'm going to be diving more so into. But rubato is basically the humanized time or the human time, a natural feel. It's something that sometimes makes things feel like it's slowing up or speeding down or something that's just kind of off, but what is it that makes it still work? So we're going to dive into a couple of examples here, and I'm going to kind of just break down the gist of how this stuff works because there are definitely different degrees of how far you can take it. And then once you understand that, then you can go back and apply the swing and start to vary it off of that. You can start to apply, special divisions of time and, create your own combinations and stuff. But this is about how to unlock those rhythmic pockets. Yeah. So if that seems interesting, then I would love it if you could like the video. And we're basically going to be talking about how to make swanky coastal hip hop. And then, yeah, we'll see where we go from there. Okay. So what we have here is a 4-4 grid, which means that it's going to count 4 times and then it's going to restart. This would be categorized as a measure or a bar. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, then at the end of that 4, it's going to reset and it will start to repeat itself. Now, the cool thing about this is a lot of times it's very easy, especially in like, well, not every genre, but a lot of times in things like techno or very quantized music that have a tendency to want to make things kind of like this, to where you can just play something here. And if you listen to this rhythm, then it's just going to be actually, this is actually push late. So let's make this very dead on. And it would sound like this. Now, when we talk about trying to humanize this quote unquote, before we even start moving things off, one thing that I do just want to throw at you, just for the sake of, I guess, continuity and the sake of creating something, is that whenever a drummer is playing, they never hit the same note or the same beat or the same, pocket or whatever at the exact same time at the exact same velocity. So if you were to take the time to even do something like this to where you turn this down and create a small variation, kind of like this, then that's something that will go a long way. The other thing is that because the person is mostly almost never hitting the exact same spot on a drum, and this isn't how to make your drum sound more realistic, but if you have something kind of like even this, to where you're slightly pitching these variously up and down, then this is actually also going to help you kind of make these hats sound a lot more natural. And if you notice, I've just used the first half, and so that way when we repeat this, it's fine. At a certain point, people are going to forget. You don't need to make everything unique, but it does help. Cool. So that's all fine and dandy and stuff. But what we want to talk about is how to break this into a matter that is going to start to give us a vibe that is not just a bang on grid. Speaking of, just in case if we need to kind of define, if we were to set something to triplets, this would be categorized as perfect swing. So if we were to divide this into two, which this would go into triplets, and we do something like this would be your perfect swing, which it would sound like da 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 da. So da 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 da. That would be there. The other thing is with Bitwig, we can actually go into quintuplets or septuplets respectively, and I encourage you to spend the time to, just mess with that because jazz timings and all that other stuff like this, what I'm describing, even though I'm talking about the difference of swing versus the quote unquote rubato, still has a place in music, and maybe that's what you're searching for. So let's go ahead and back up a little bit though. The main thing about this is that whenever this repeats, whatever is placed on here is going to be in the exact same position every time. And no matter how messed up this beat can become, for better or for worse, it is always going to repeat, which creates an expectation, and that expectation creates a rhythm, because a rhythm is a repetition. You can break the rhythm after you establish it, but you have to first find something that people can catch on, that they know is coming, to get them to expect whatever is going on. So what I mean by that is, let's go to the extreme and let's move all this stuff over to the left. And what I want to show you is just the far side of this, because what you can do, actually, I'm going to go ahead and pull up life so that way we've got a little bit of variation. I don't really care what this pulls up. I just need some other kinds of drums and percussion and whatnot. So I'm just going to let this play for about 10 seconds. Cool. That's more than enough. So I'm going to take all this stuff out, and now that we've got some percussion to play with, this is probably one of the coolest things about life, but what I can do is just take some of these hits and start to create a relationship with them. Now, the interesting thing is that if I were to place this in here, and we have a metronome on, for example, you can see this is not in time at all. But if I repeat this in the exact same way, listen to it. You see the I can't even repeat that. I sound like I'm having a hard time with speech. But even still, when we play this against a metronome, the placement of this is happening at the same time, even though this is quote unquote unquantized. So let's go a little bit more extreme with this. I'm going to move this over to the left, and I'm going to place this here. And let's do something kind of like this. And one of my favorite things to do is to stretch this out and set it to repitch. And what we can do now is repeat this twice, but listen to how this has a repetition of itself as well. So I'm going to hit this on the metronome so we can listen to this, but take a listen. Can you hear the rhythm? And it sounds totally off, but it's working because it's repeating in the exact same place. If you want to tighten it up, something that you can do is respect, a couple of rules, like maybe quantizing the downbeat, which is the very first beat of this, which is slightly going to alter this, but it is going to match up a little bit closer with at least the first hit of the metronome. So now they're playing a little bit nicer, but the thing is that there aren't really any rules to this, and that's the cool thing about it. So you can essentially make this as messed up or as on time as you want to. And I would say when I was learning this, shout out to Cage/Aiden, because he was the one that really like sat down with me and was like, look, dude, this is how you do this. But the thing about it is that you want to go the extreme, because figuring this out is going to help you find these uncanny rhythms that normally you probably would never explore. And it's something that's very different than just playing this here, right? Because if I just have this over here and then I start playing these rhythms, you can see that there are these offsets, and sometimes that can be good. And we'll talk about polyrhythm in just a second. But for the most part, we kind of want to build something around whatever this is. So if we take a listen. Like, that's the rhythm of it. And as you can hear, there's this aspect of speeding up and slowing down. Now, I know that I described that as part of the definition. That's not really what it is, but it is a humanistic time. But as long as you are obeying, staying within anywhere from a beat to, I would say, maybe 2 bars, because after that you tend to kind of like lose the person's ability to keep track of what's going on, unless if you're doing like IDM and everybody's like ready for it. Generally speaking, you need something that is going to be a lot more repetitive in that way. And so even though I'm using different sounds on here and kind of making something that would be more like weird and glitchy and stuff, you can absolutely do the same thing with this. And what I would even argue is that some very easy ways that you can create this feel is by doing something called offsetting. So right now I have just a straight beat, and before I do anything else, what I'll grab is maybe an Alchem clap or an Alchem snare. It doesn't really matter. Let's just find one that's not too abrasive. Sure. I'll turn this down just a little bit because it's more about just being able to listen to it. But this is relatively quantized now, and if we place this on the 2, we've done something which might be categorized as an anchor point. I'm going to talk more about that in just a second, but let me fix this a little bit and just make this a little bit easier. So if we play these on top of each other, then we're going to have a do-do-ka, do-do-ka, right? That's fine. You know, that works. That gives me, for some reason, this gives me very Mobb Deep Shook One vibes. But what happens if we take the snare of this and we move this like, I don't know, 1/16 of a 16th forward? Let's take a listen to that now. Okay, let's go a little bit more with this, and let's grab a time shift and push these hats here, all of them a little bit late. So by like 15 milliseconds. And what I'm doing is not right or wrong. It's about the vibe. It's about the type of groove that we're trying to build in a way that doesn't seem just like, you know, bang on beat. And sometimes there's a case in point for that. Like I said, techno works really well because everything is crisp and nice and tight. But when it comes into this kind of hip hop music that I like to make and my friends like to make, it really benefits having this pocket that's like, oh man, how did he throw that together? And this is how. So what I've done is I've taken all the hats. They're actually on grid, as you can see, but the time shift is synonymous with track delay if you're familiar with Ableton. And you can move this forward or late, although if you have this on MIDI, it's going to sound messed up because the MIDI is going to trigger, but then it's going to try to adjust the sound. So we can talk about that in another video, but just stay with audio for now. Let's listen to this. So when you listen to this, honestly, I'm not even hearing the metronome, at least maybe only in certain parts. But what I'm noticing mostly is the relationship between this last hat and this. This is kind of being masked behind this, and you can argue that you can either A, move this here, or just B, take it out, because negative space is a really positive thing when it comes into this stuff. And let it be known that when it comes into making drums that are going to be like super funky and very busy, the more busy your drums, the shorter you want your sounds to be, because you're going to value, like I said, this negative space here. Technically, it would probably be here because this is a very short sound, but yeah, that's neither here nor there. So yeah, there's that. Now, what would happen if I take this one and move that off, and I'll take this one, move that off, take this one and move that off? Listen to how the groove is going to sound now. It's pretty messed up. But if we take inspiration from that and maybe we adjust this a little bit here, a little bit there, let's see what that sounds like. And the key to this is to be subtle with it. Well, if you're trying to get stuff work together to where it's not super obvious, I will say. So this one's on grid, this one's a little bit off, maybe this one's on grid, this one's a little bit off, this one's on, this one's off, and then maybe we'll make this one just barely off. But this should be a little bit tighter now, so. Yeah, to me, that's a nice middle ground of making this a little bit more workable. And so, as you can see, we've done a little bit of a combination behind moving stuff a little bit off, shifting things a little bit late, shifting things a little bit early, but this is not something that you get from swing. Does that make sense? Likewise, when we talk about anchor points, because we only have 2 sounds, I've decided to use the snare, but as I was going to mention from before, the anchor point is something that is usually, maybe not always, but usually in the exact same spot every time the measure comes back around. So what I mean by that is, especially when it comes into doing like a boom, ka, ka, boom, ka. One thing that I like to do a lot is actually make my snare late, and then this one will be on time, and then this one will be late. But listen to the relationship of this. It actually works for me. But listening to this, you can see that this snare here now has become the anchor point. because this is always in the exact same spot to where everything else is dancing around it. And that can be anywhere within the track. It doesn't have to be, or sorry, anywhere within the beat or the measure that you've created. It doesn't need to be a snare. It can be, you know, a piece of percussion. So maybe I've got a wonky sound in here that I can pull out. So okay, let's take this because sometimes it's not even a single sound. It could be a different rhythm. So if I go, so I'm going to kind of sound that out, and we're going to create kind of like a swing here to where it's like boom. Now, if I just leave this here to where this is a little bit off, but if it's relatively close, kind of like this, it might sound a little bit too forward. Yeah. But if I move this and I match this now with this hat, and then I take this one and move it a little bit late, it's in between a triplet and, I don't know, just somebody playing badly, I guess. But take a listen. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I am going to move that a little bit late, and I'm going to take this one out and just reverse this. And this is just my intention, or like just my, sorry, my intuition when it comes into making these kinds of beats. But now this has become the anchor because on that third beat here, this is always going to be the same. So and what my mind is naturally doing is waiting for this to come back. So all this other stuff that's happening, like right? The thing is like if you start to dance around this now, like there is definitely like a Goldilocks thing of like how far can you go. But if we just listen to it and we kind of, you know, do something like this, see if your brain can catch it. Actually, to me, that seems like that still works, partly just because it feels like that's more of a Latin groove, or, you know, something else. The other thing is that once we start adding in other elements and we start playing around this stuff, sorry, let me find a kick. Cool. I am going to tame this just a little bit. Sorry, I tend to make my kicks and stuff super loud. But hopefully this is making sense. But if we start doing something kind of like this, where we've got kind of a low pass thing, and now we've got the downbeat, we've got two anchors now, in a sense. That doesn't always mean that you have to put the kick on the one. So when this rolls around, like there's lots of things that I do where I might move this off or something like that. But when you first start the drop or the main section, sometimes it does help a lot to just be like, boom, there's the kick. Or there needs to be some element that establishes the one. Does that make sense? It doesn't always have to be the kick, but something needs to help you establish the one, because when you get all sloppy and all that, you come back home, you know? So if I have something kind of like this, it will sound. That's really wonky. But the thing is that it still kind of works because this is keeping track of it. And that's why I want you to explore. I want you to go too far with this. Now, would I make a track like this? Not necessarily, but if I wanted to, per se, let's say I did want to be this experimental when it comes into rhythm and stuff, it can work, absolutely. As long as whatever it is that you're doing has a recurrence, because the thing is that even though this is all sloppy, look, this is a carbon copy. And like I said before, if this is over this way, then it's going to work. And the cool thing is that if this is super messed up, something that you can do to kind of like fake out your listeners is, let's say you make these snares really messed up, but then you put one on the beat and then you do something, wait, kind of like this. Well, now we've created a call and response. So we've got a call here that's part of the rhythm, and then we make it even more messed up. That's partly here. And that was that 2-bar thing that I was talking about. And it's not a rule, it's a guideline, but take a listen. It's really messed up for sure. But the cool thing about this is that you can play very soft melodies and other stuff around them. Now, one other key thing that is going to help you out a lot with this kind of stuff is, let's say you're trying to find a nice middle ground, right? So let's go back to this rhythm that I usually like to do, which is I like to push these snares a little bit early and maybe move this here. Say I wanted to try to make this track a little bit busier. And actually, maybe for this one, I'll just leave that there because we can do like a hit on beat, on beat. This one is super late, kind of as a fake out. If you look here, you'll notice that there are already placements in between this grid now that we've almost essentially created our own unique grid. And the reason why that's kind of cool is because let's say I want to create a kick pattern. If I do something kind of like this, it might not be as cool because this is here and this is here. So we can listen to it. Well, it kind of pulls away from this. But if I move this and I match this to the placement of this, maybe we can even do something like this. Right? That kind of works. But we can also do something here, and maybe what we do is we just fortify that one here. And as long as you are doing this with intention and like you're kind of aware of where those placements go, then you can end up making something that's very groovy this way, and it's a lot of fun to do. But anytime somebody asks me how I put my beats together and stuff, like these are the things that I think about in which to cultivate just those rhythms. And to be honest with you, like I'm not even a master of it. Like the people that I look up to, the people that I talk to, like if you listen to the pockets and stuff that they create, it's pretty like profound with having this knowledge and how they still manage to surprise me with how intricate their sense of time and space mastery is. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but in any case, yeah. And so really when it comes down into this kind of rhythm or when you're starting with these kinds of beats, I've talked about this before in other videos, but if you do something that's kind of like this, you can, but generally speaking, it's really hard to make a compelling beat when you do this like basic halftime thing like this. You can do it, but like to me, this is the difference between stuff that people like, you know, Chi and Cage and Zayn and Aiden and same guy, you know, stuff like what they make versus the other halftime, which is usually just the yomp basses, right? Of like, like almost like slower glitch hop. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just tend to like, this stuff gets old for me. But what I really value within a lot of those other people's music is this kind of stuff because they really put a lot of time into being like, here is a groove that you just listen to and now it's like, oh snap, this is where I want to be. And using those tools in combination with each other, so perhaps maybe we time shift this stuff and, you know, play Goldilocks. This is too far, this is not enough, this is just right. That's really where you're going to find your own sense of style and how you culminate this stuff. Cool. So, you know, something that we can also do is we can just push this a little bit late to where it rolls now. And so this little roll right here is going to help bring that one back. So check this out. See, early, 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 late. It still holds itself together though, and the more that you fill in the negative space, the more that it's going to find that there's a sense of this syncopation in those polyrhythms like what I was talking about. One final thing that I want to leave you with is something that is super duper helpful that, you know, isn't the biggest secret in the world or whatever, but just a really cool trick that helps you kind of reinforce the snare. Is if you have a piece of audio or something that goes right before this, and what you want to do is just place it here. And it doesn't need to be specific, but if you have a kind of like that, then whenever this repeats, it's going to actually sound like it's kind of like a flam. And a lot of times this really helps drive whatever beat this is. And if you notice, especially right here, you'll see that I leave this space open until it's time to hit the next beat. Same thing here. Same thing here. And sometimes it might even be worth just like leaving it completely open and not having anything. If you want to emphasize that, right, to where it's like, then having that little pre-click or that pre-sound or whatever is really helpful. You know, let's say I wanted to kind of make this a little bit funkier. I could do something kind of like that. And now whenever I duplicate this, we'll go here and then I'll take this out. And then on this section, I thought that I had another kick there, but okay. But we'll take this section kind of like so, and then we'll place these two kicks here. Because we were talking about some of the other tricks that we learned from before, I can turn this one down and make it a little less thumpy. And now whenever I play this, we've got something that has a call and response that makes the beat a little bit more intricate. Oops, and then forgot this part, so we'll just jump from there. Maybe this part I'll just do a reverse, because I like to kind of make my beats like that, to where it's like big open space on that fourth bar at the beginning. So do, you know, and then we can kind of have a little roll like that that will kind of finish up the phrase. So and then I think that I want this to be kind of maybe here, so maybe something like that. So and we'll place that there. Yeah. And when you want something to feel more laid back, kind of like this, you'll notice that my snares are late. Actually, most of them are early. That last one is late. If you want to actually, yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter. But typically speaking, if you want something to feel more energetic and pushing forward, then you want to make your snares a little bit earlier. But if you do make your snares a little bit later instead, which I think, let's compare, because to me this sounded laid back. What we can do is just place this right before here. And then I'm just going to, let me see. Sorry, I wanted to be able to compare and contrast. So what I'll do is undo for one. Undo, undo. And I'm going to move all this stuff over to the left. And then move all this stuff over to the right. So this one will be the late snare. We'll listen to that. And then now let's do the early snare. Or sorry, this one is the early snare. And then we'll take all of this, because that way I can just move it. And then we'll do the late snare. So let's move that off. And then I'll just leave it as is. There we go. So we've got the early snare on the first section. And then here it's going to transition. So maybe we can color code this. But I just want you to listen, because that's really what today's thing is about. It's critical listening of how to manipulate time and space when it comes into rhythm. And that's why this is such a fascinating video for me. And that's why I really appreciate people like Aiden and Cage and Chi and Zane. And I keep saying Aiden and Cage, they're the same guy. But those people have really opened my eyes a lot to how this music works. And this is just a small glimpse. But to me, this is the most important part in making it what it is. Because the aesthetic after that, whether it's harsh or heavy or light or, you know, boom bappy or whatever, still comes from these same principles that people have been doing since the 80s. But this is just a way that I've been able to articulate it and describe it to hopefully you, and to describe it to myself in a way that makes sense. So yeah. Aside from the weird transition right here, could you even tell the difference? I'm curious. That's something that I find to be really interesting. I also think that I might have, yeah, the reason why it sounds off, lol, is it picked back up, but this printed one step off. But to be honest, once that came back, like you could barely even tell. But the fascinating thing about this is like the difference between this and the late one is not very much, but it can kind of like change the energy. And that's why the whole thing about micro timing is such a big deal. And that was like, if anybody was wondering why I made such a big deal out of the stepwise thing, right? You can't get this stuff from this. You, generally speaking, unless if you have a very specific kind of sequencer, you need to have the control of kind of moving everything a little bit early, a little bit off. And as you'll notice, I did this with all of the elements that are in here. Like, yeah, there's only 4 tracks, but everything has a very particular placement to try to help support the groove. And so having that kind of understanding, it might seem like a daunting thing or whatever, but trust me, with a little bit of practice, you're going to be like, oh, I get it. It's not that big of a deal. You can start here if you want to and then break stuff up. But for me, I'd rather just, just get a weird audio loop or chunk or whatever and just toss stuff in here to start throwing a beat over. If you can get this far, then all you need is a hook. You've got a beat, find an intro, find an outro, and guess what? You're done. Boom. That's a song. Or you can just, apply more time to the drums and this and that. But like, that's why I love this thing, man, because this used to be my biggest struggle. I used to not understand how to throw these kinds of rhythms together. It's something that I still need practice on, but it's been such a fun journey. If you listen to the music that I've made where I was trying to do this in like 2021 versus when I started to catch on in 2022, and I've been doing music since. Actually, yeah, even listening to some of the Flying Lotus stuff that I used to do back in 2014, where I would just maybe like have the kicks and snares on grid, but just move the shakers late or something, where this is a totally, totally different vibe. It is such a more mature expression of being able to control that timing in space. And there's a lot more confidence in it, I guess. So yeah, that is kind of my masterclass on rubato. If you like this video, then I have other masterclasses available on my Arcana memberships. If you like my sounds, I've got a sample pack available on my website, presets, all that stuff. And if you want to hear my music, it's also available on my website. So if you have any questions or you have anything to add to this kind of thing, I would love to know. I did not talk about resampling. I did not talk about how to make your drums quote unquote pro. This is how to control your rhythms. This is how to be a boss at saying, I want this vibe. And now when you listen to this kind of stuff, especially when we're listening to, Chi and all those other guys or whatever, Ivy Lab, you're going to be able to start picking up on what's going on a little bit better. And I'm excited to see what you all do with this kind of knowledge because it's very powerful. So in any case, much love, guys. Thank you so much. Happy holidays. And, let me know what you think in the comments. Bye, everyone.